Xin, host on China Global Television Network, or CGTN, which is run by China's Communist Party. Shen, thank you for joining us on CNBC.
Thank you very much. I work for CGTN, the national broadcaster.
So the U.S. moved ahead with tariffs on China imports. How should the U.S. expect China to respond?
Well, I think China already had its responses, right? We had some kind of reaction, the tariffs.
$75 billion.
Something like that, yes. And it already went into simultaneously with the U.S. tariffs. I think that's a very strong message that China is not going to stand down. We're going to protect our interests, our legitimate interests, but we're not going to do it. We're not going to do it over the top, let's say. We just want to send a very strong message. As our guest said just now, this tariff escalation is hurting China as well as the United States, so we don't want things to go even worse.
The market is trying to understand if a meeting between U.S. and Chinese officials will happen in September. Do you think it's going to happen? And if so, what is China's ultimate objective?
Well, I think China's ultimate objective is to reach a deal with the United States because, as I said, our economies are being hurt. It's not good for the Chinese economy. It's not good for the American economy. So we want to have a deal. But as the Chinese government said already, the United States will need to create the conditions that are conducive for the resumption of negotiations. President Trump's decision to put additional tariffs this September 1st is not in the right direction for talks to resume very soon.
Right, but at the root of this trade dispute is China forcing U.S. companies to share technology and IP when they operate inside the country. Is China ready to make concessions on that front?
You know, this is a very disputable point because you see things that way, but if you go and ask a lot of American companies, the latest statistics survey by the U.S. China Business Council found that actually 5% of American companies say they have been asked to transfer technology, and it was not some kind of forced technology transfer. They would all have to agree to it, otherwise they drop the deal. Of course, that survey was based on a rather small sample. It was 100-something, but I think it does say something. If you talk about IP protection, I think China is aware of the problems that we have. We are doing a lot because China is also very much investing on innovation and IP protection because we also want to be able to innovate ourselves. We are also climbing up on the innovation index. So a lot has been done. A new law on foreign investment has been put in place to further enhance IP protection. I can give you a lot of things.
Right, but I think more work certainly needs to be done. A lot of U.S. companies come on our air every day talking about how that is a concern as they try to expand across the country. Let's move on, though. I mean, our president has stepped up his attack of President Xi as this trade war continues. What's the perception of President Trump inside China?
Well, I think after a couple of years of President Trump's term, I think the Chinese people have kind of found a way to understand him. We are not going to follow what he says every day because that's going to be very perplexing and exhausting, actually, to a certain degree. So we actually want to see what he does, you know, at the end of the day, his policies and what really happens on the ground. We understand that he is the elected president, elected leader of the United States, so we have to give him due respect.
China's not monolithic, 1.3 billion people. So I asked this question understanding you may not be able to represent the sentiments of everybody. But
no.
How many or what is the knowledge base of the average Chinese consumer at this point in terms of being aware of this trade war, being aware of the impact that it's having on their daily lives and or to the economy of China?
I think they're very aware because the news about the trade war, the news about what's happening is, you know, on a daily basis on their TV or on their social media. So they are very much aware with what's happening. In terms of impact, I would say it's a little bit similar to what is happening here. I mean, yesterday I was on the streets. I was outside a market, Target, for instance, to find out inside as well, to find out the prices and I had asked a couple of people how they feel. They mostly didn't feel so much yet. I mean, I guess the tariffs on consumer prices are just kicking in, so it's going to take a while for people to feel the pain, for ordinary people to feel the pain. Although I went to the Chinatown, the souvenir shops there, the Chinese grocery stores there are feeling a bigger hit. I think in China is also a very different story for different people. For ordinary consumers, life goes on as normal. But if you're working for an American manufacturer, if you're producing for an American company, you might feel the uncertainty at least, or if you are not already given up and the American producer going to Vietnam or Indonesia or somewhere else.
That's a big point that the president's told Americans here, is that jobs are leaving, supply chains are leaving. We've done some reporting from Vietnam where they're being flooded with new orders. Isn't China worried about that?
Of course we're worried about that. But, you know, at the end of the day, if prices is lower in Vietnam, in Bangladesh, what are we going to do? Business are going to leave. Actually, this started a couple of years ago, right? Since 2015, companies already started to move to places where costs are lower, to Africa as well. So this is simple economics, and we're not going to put tariffs on, let's say, African countries or Bangladesh or Vietnam. We have to upgrade, bring ourselves up on the supply chain, right? Be more innovative, develop our basic research and development so that we can be stronger. So these are the pain of development.
Are there projections of how many jobs you can lose and withstand the loss of?
I don't have any specific number at this moment, but I think the latest number that I have for the private sector is their revenue, their profit rating has actually gone up for the month of July, if I'm not mistaken, meaning they're very resilient, they're very resourceful, you know, they're small, so they're flexible. If they see there's some uncertainty here, they immediately find something else to do. So it's, I think it's a mixed, some bad impacts, some, you know, not so very strong.
You mentioned, of course, China trying to move up the innovation chain. Something else China has talked a lot about for many years, of course, is also creating more of a consumer-led economy. Do you think that's happening? We hear anecdotally, of course, about younger people there more willing to take on debt, spending a lot more. Is the consumer sort of coming more to the fore in China right now?
Absolutely. I think the numbers says very clearly that the domestic consumption is making up an increasingly big part of the Chinese economy. That is why, you know, if you talk about the impact of tariffs on the Chinese economy, because domestic consumption is bigger in terms of proportion, so the impact is, you know, cushioned, let's say. In terms of innovation, China is among all the developing countries, the highest in the World Innovation Index. That's an index made by WIPO, which is the UN IP agency, together with Cornell University and INSEAD. So China is doing a lot. And because of that, we know that we have to protect IP, because otherwise people will be taking things from us as well.
Yeah, protect it, not steal it, I guess.
Yeah.
You know, well, yeah, you have, there's a process you have to learn, right?
You know, we are in the 13th week of protests in Hong Kong, and the U.S. has warned China not to use force. Is Beijing concerned about how the world perceives this aggressive stance, both in rhetoric and its military presence towards these Hong Kong protests?
Well, I think you're talking about the Chinese military on standby in Shenzhen, which is across the border from Hong Kong on the mainland side. I think the message there is more or less of a deterrence, you know, that the violence and the rioters definitely should not think about ever spread to the mainland, because there they will be met with a very strong reaction. But I don't think it's a message threatening to go into Hong Kong to bring the situation down. I think, first of all, the scale of things is going down, although it might still take a while. Secondly, I think the riots and the offenders are losing the public support of the Hong Kong people. We see the violence that they're committing. We see the destruction that they're inflicting on public property and the interruption to the daily life of the Hong Kong people, shutting down the metro and disrupting the operation of the airport. A lot of people are losing support of these young people.
You think so? I mean, it's 1/7 the entire population is protesting, so...
But you have to make a distinction between the peaceful protesters and the rioters. I'm talking about the public support for the rioters, for people who commit violence. I think that's definitely a no-go.
We don't get to watch your show for obvious reasons. Do you?
No,
I don't
you
know
can.
We can.
You can.
Okay, well, maybe we'll start to. Do you? I don't know if you have a lot of government officials on. Is there a way for you to characterize sort of your sense as a journalist over there, obviously state-owned, global television network, the feeling of senior leaders in the government in terms of what is next, whether or not September will actually prove to be helpful talks between the U.S. and China, or whether they are more frustrated and perhaps unwilling to actually even really engage?
Concerning your question about whether we have opportunities to interview a lot of Chinese officials, not so much, I must say. That's reality. I would love to talk to them more often. But, we are an English program, so we have to have people who are fluent in English. That already, shrinks the pool of potential guests very much. In terms of the prospect of having more talks, I think the possibility is always there. I mean, the ball is not on the court of China here. It really depends on whether the United States is able to show sincerity, to show good faith that it really wants to have a trade deal. I think China is willing to engage anytime, but it has to be mutually respectful. It has to be a mutually acceptable deal. And I think that's common sense. It's not too much for
President Trump this morning, again, raising the idea that the Chinese want to wait him out until the election. Is that a fair theory?
Well, he can think this way if he wants, but I think for policymakers, for prudent policymakers, you're not going to rely on luck, right? Who knows who's going to get elected?
Well, the Chinese can see poll data just as well as Americans can.
But poll data can be wrong. I mean, what happened before President Trump was elected? So you're not going to rely on luck. You have to prepare for, all kinds of possibilities and see what is in your best interest. If President Trump can table a reasonable deal, I don't see any reason that China has to say no.
But does China believe that someone winning against Trump would result in a better deal for China?
Not necessarily. I think Elizabeth Warren has said that she will be tough on China, so I don't think it's a very wise decision for China to wait out and see what happens.
In terms of timeline, we're watching October 1st, which of course represents the 70th anniversary of the founding of the People's Republic of China. Yeah. Could this date be a line in the sand when it comes to Hong Kong and these trade talks?
Well, I think definitely the sentiment will be affected a little bit. We don't, it's a year of celebration. 70 years, a big deal for the Chinese people. People are genuinely very happy about what has happened over the past 70 years. So it's going to put a little bit of shadow on the sentiment. But there will be a modest celebration in Hong Kong on the mainland. Things will be very spectacular. I mean, I was driving by Tiananmen Square the other day. All kinds of preparations are in place. People are really looking forward to it.
Finally, China tourism here in the United States is down, and it's affecting all kinds of companies that we cover. Is the mentality that you just do not want to visit America right now?
I don't think it's that the Chinese do not want to visit America. I was in the American embassy getting the visa for this. I was really surprised at the long queue that I had to wait. I think people have a lot of enthusiasm. The thing is, I think they're not feeling very welcome of the kind of messages that's coming out of either the White House or some other officials, or what they're seeing, Chinese students being suspected of being spies or stuff like that. It doesn't really help very much.
Well, Xin, we appreciate you sitting down with us here on Squawk on the Street, providing the perspective of the Chinese. Liu Xin.
Thank you so much for having me.